Hey people, welcome to Accidental Gods, to the podcast where we believe that another world is still possible and that together we can make it happen. I'm Manda Scott, your host at this place on the web where art meets activism, politics meets philosophy, and science meets spirituality, all in the service of conscious evolution and increasingly in the service of finding a way through to a flourishing, regenerative, functioning future that we would be proud to leave to the generations that come after us. My guest this week is someone that I found on LinkedIn, one of those social media that I don't fully understand, but people who are not part of my normal bubble have a tendency to impinge on my awareness in ways they don't in any of the other social media that I use. And so I came across Dr. John Collins when I was looking for someone to help me and us to get to grips with the ethics, particularly of AI, but of all digital and disruptive innovation. And John is the ethics and responsible innovation advisor for the Machine Intelligence Garage, or garage, I guess, if you live in other parts of the world, and is on the Ethics Advisory Board at Digital Catapult, which I am awed to discover is something that the current UK government has set up to promote sane, intelligent, responsible, ethical innovation. So anyway, John seemed to me to be an extraordinarily good person to talk about things where I really have not enough knowledge even to know what questions to ask. And it definitely proved so. And in the long run, we ended up dragging the conversation into areas of my obsession, possibly areas of his obsession. We had so much fun just riffing off things that we take for granted that may or may not be true, certainly things that I take for granted that may or may not be true, and that therefore the podcast takes for granted that may or may not be true. Yes, I do conflate myself with the podcast, although we do have rather a wonderful team, and I'm not conflating the rest of the team with the podcast, honestly. So here we go. It was a fun and inspiring conversation. People of the podcast, please welcome Dr. John Collins. So, Dr. John Collins, welcome to the Accidental Gods podcast. Thank you for making time in what seems an extremely busy schedule. And I found you on LinkedIn, which I don't really know how to work, but it's an amazing place to discover people who aren't part of my normal bubble. And we're stepping very much out of my normal bubble on this, which I think is a good thing. Stepping out of bubbles is always good. But it means that this is not an area where I have any kind of expertise. And so, with apologies to the listeners who do have expertise in this area, likely to ask really stupid questions. So I apologize for that in advance, and welcome to the podcast.
There's no such thing as unintelligent or daft questions. I mean, sometimes what we consider the simplest of questions, like when a child asks you why, are the most taxing, actually, because more often than not, what they expose is what we don't know and how we can't describe or explain. Explanation is probably too strong a word. Describe why something happens, why something is, why something isn't. So, feel free to ask whatever questions, and actually, the more searching they are.
Alrighty, I will give my inner 5-year-old free rein. Thank you. Okay, so with that in mind, thank you. You're Ethics and Responsible Innovation Advisor for the Machine Intelligence Garage and on the Ethics Advisory Board at Digital Capital. And I've spent a little while exploring YouTube videos from both of these, so I have a slight edge on people. But can you explain what these two things are and then how you fit into it?
Well, the Digital Catapult is UK government's agency that brings together big business, small business, startups in the tech world to help them grow and scale and do things right. And as part of doing things right, they have created 5-6 years ago a group called the Machine Intelligence Garage. We're an advisory committee of, I don't know, there's about 15, 20 ethics and responsible innovation advisors, people who've worked in ethics or know about ethics or think they know about ethics, to come together to help advise companies, but in particular startups, about how really to embed ethical thinking and approaches from the very start of their startup, ideally from before they start up. And having deep conversations that explore how to better develop their products and processes so they're mindful of the rights of others and the ethics and everything that goes into actually running what I would call a proper business in a responsible way and actually using tech responsibly.
Brilliant.
That's it's very important because most people don't even consider what they're doing before they start doing it. Yeah, I'm a scientist by training. We tend to do experiments.
Don't we just? Let's interrupt there for a moment and get a little bit of your background of how you then came to be invited to be an ethics advisor to business from a government. I have to say, this is revealing my great surprise that they actually get themselves together enough to do that. I'm quite impressed. I thought they were too busy playing musical chairs at the top, but they wanted proper ethics, or at least they were advised that that would be a good idea. How did you come in? At what stage did you come into this, and how did you come to be someone whose name was put forward or who snagged their attention?
I have a background in developing disruptive technologies. Those technologies that actually change the shape of the world in some way, shape or form, financially, environmentally or otherwise. And the first time I really started doing this, actually, I did a PhD in nuclear physics and semiconductor theory that was funded by the Central Electricity Generating Board at the time. And electricity generation was nationalised in the UK, and we had lots of nuclear power stations. And I did this thing called a CASE Award, which was a degree that's funded by industry, by the CEGB, as it was. And it was to develop a personal dosimeter, which is a dosimeter, for particular types of radiation that were very hard to detect in real time. In fact, impossible to detect in real time in terms of people being able to carry it around, so that people working in the nuclear power industry didn't get exposed to radiation that they didn't know about until a couple of weeks later, when this film badge that they used to wear, which used to fog up according to the amount of radiation that they'd been exposed to, was finally developed. And it was terrible. It used to cost the CEGB about 3% of their yearly earnings in downtime and loss of people being able to work, sometimes ever again. Sometimes people would find, wow, I've had a dose that's huge. Where did it come from? No idea. So I developed this little sensor that was portable, that worked in real time to detect radiation, wow, this particular radiation. And it saved the CEGB about 1% of their annual.
And presumably also it meant that they could find out where the leaks were.
Exactly.
In real time, rather than waiting 2 weeks and trying to track back where some guy had been.
And I'm not saying there's loads and loads of leaks, but there's often you're working in a place that has a background radiation that is higher than you want to be exposed to, but that's the nature of a nuclear reactor. But the length of time you spend there should be commensurate with the potential exposure level. And it's knowing that flux that gives you an idea of, right, you've had your 3 minutes or you've had your 3 hours. Now you can't come into this area again for another 2 weeks or for another week. Not, you've had 5 times what you should have.
And I'm guessing you saved lives, or certainly saved people's health, which, much as I love the CEGB, actually I don't, that they, it's good that you saved them 1% of their gross product, but the fact that you were saving people's lives and helping their health is also a really essential part of what you did.
Absolutely. In fact, that's the more important part than the money side of things. justification for funding is often an economic justification. It's not, or an emotional justification, whereas most of the time it should be. I mean, it's a little bit like our activities towards abating climate change. You can go for funding for various projects, tech or otherwise based, and the funders always ask, what's our return on investment? I said, well, it's a greener, cleaner planet, No, how much money is it going to make us, John? And it's soul destroying. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Is that let's help save people or do something.
I want to come back to how you got from there to being at Machine Intelligence Garage, but before that, I live in a world where everybody is aware that we're in the middle of a multipolar, multisystemic crisis, and that everything needs to change, and that one of the things that needs to change is the profit motive. I'm hearing you and thinking, you live in a world where the profit motive is still God. Is that the case?
Every startup I talk to wants to make that is their main driver most of the time.
Right.
I mean, in the tech world, all we ever hear about are tech bros creating a new crypto token. I call it crypto shit because I think they really are bad for everybody and they really need to be got rid of. But yeah, money is the old god still. Yeah, there's more money awash in the City of London for tech investment than there's ever been.
Okay.
And there are companies now, 10 years ago, the idea of a unicorn company was out of this world. Now, everyone's trying to be.
What's a unicorn?
A unicorn company is one that's valued before they've even made money, before oftentimes they've even got going properly. They're valued at £1 billion or $1 billion or more.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Do you imagine being a 3-year-old company that suddenly has a valuation of $1 billion or more, mostly on the fact that they've had huge investment? So you get these young startup companies, 5-10 people, who suddenly get £20 million investment, and then they get £200 million investment, and then on the back of virtually nothing, they're suddenly valued because of that investment at £1 billion or more.
Right.
Then they become very attractive. Then you go for your IPO, your initial public offering, and lots of people make lots of money, even though they might not have done anything. They might have actually done something really bad, but we just don't know. It's
black orchids all over again, isn't it? Only they've got the potential to destroy the planet in ways that black orchids probably didn't have. They weren't black tulips. Sorry, black tulips. It's that everybody says something is worth something, therefore it must be worth something, which isn't necessarily the case. Last thing I heard, everybody wanted to go from startup to acquisition by Google or Amazon or Facebook or Apple, because then you can just stop working and the bigger companies bought you up. Let's leave that for a moment. Go back to, you're working for CEGB. You've created a real-time dosimeter, which sounds absolutely amazing. I remember when I was a vet, we used to have the little bits of film on the badges, and all the time we were only being exposed to x-rays, but even so you'd come back and somebody would go, right, you're not going in the radiology room again for the next 6 months, sorry. So give us a very edited highlight of how you hopped from there to machine intelligence.
A couple of things in between doing that and being headhunted by De Beers Diamonds. And I was headhunted to go, and basically 28 years old, given 5 million quid, 3 people to work with and a big lab, and told, John, go play.
Wow.
And what was I playing with? I was playing with the notion that we could create, develop, invent a technology that would make man-made diamond that was indistinguishable from natural diamond in a more easy fashion than the high pressure technology that had been developed back in the mid 1950s. That is still used to create pretty much 80% of the world's diamond, which is man-made, it's synthetic, and it's used for industrial uses. Having a manufacturing process, you can create identical, sustainable materials, and the same is true for diamond. Anyway, I was particularly successful. I created the technology, invented the technology to make lab-grown diamonds. Also called synthetic diamonds, but because they've been synthesized, but they're still carbon, they're still diamond. I did all sorts of wacky stuff. And it was because I was given the opportunity
So did you make the Kohinoor? Could you make the Kohinoor? I mean, obviously someone has to cut it, but you could have created a synthetic Kohinoor. Doesn't that crash the value of diamonds somewhat?
No, you see, this is the thing. In theory, you could make the Kohinoor, but I don't think anyone would really want to, because it wouldn't have the same value. And part of the purpose for this project was to show just how low cost could you make these things and just how high quality. And now you can see Pandora. All of the diamonds that they use are lab-grown diamonds. And there's a really good... The best reason is the reason why I actually started doing the project, which wasn't known to De Beers until I left. And I finally, a few years after I left, actually told them, or they got to know. They wanted to do it to protect their market. Yeah, the diamond market is huge. It's created. It's marketed. Every diamond is unique. 86 million carats a year of natural diamond are mined and sold. It's a huge number. So they're not that rare. I mean, you're not talking in terms of tens of thousands. You're talking about millions, and you're talking about over the last 100 years, hundreds of millions of carats of diamond effectively have been mined and produced. A huge, huge number. And that long will that continue all the time we have mined diamonds. But I have a problem with mined diamonds. I mean, the Kimberley diamond mine was the only man-made structure visible from space. And when I was a kid, I saw pictures of this, and I saw pictures of children in Angola and other places, open cast mining. And I just thought, everyone's saying you can see the Great Wall of China. You can't see the Great Wall of China from space. You have to have quite a high resolution telescope to do that, even from the space station. What people were seeing was the Yangtze River, much, much bigger. And they thought, that must be the Great Wall. Gee, what a great wall and all that. So I just thought it was just obscene to have a diamond mine that big. And that was one of many. There were dozens of these things. Enormous craters on the earth. They use enormous amounts of land that could be used for regenerative agriculture. They use a huge number of people. Great that we employ a huge number of people, but they could be retrained in agriculture, regenerative agriculture, something. They're all in places where that would be an ideal technology to implement. Use huge amounts of water, resources, should we say. And ethically, it's awful. Because the more there is this drive towards mining, there's illegal mining, there's artisan mining, there's lots of women's artisanal diamond mines all over Africa, and they need to be able to operate and not forced out of operation by the really big boys. But the key to lab-grown diamond and the ethical bit is they're environmentally friendly. They can be created from renewable energy sources, electricity in particular. Most importantly, they're conflict-free. They're not blood diamonds. We can trace their provenance back to the very gases that they were made from. And we can actually produce a nice sort of table of outputs about just how ethical they actually are.
Okay.
And it's really important, because mined diamonds, no matter what, finding the provenance of them is like finding the provenance of old artworks. I mean, it's all done on a basis of trust, and there are some industries where that trust is lost very easily, particularly when you have large companies that can be divisive about their marketing. Not saying that De Beers was like that. Actually, De Beers did phenomenal stuff. They sold all of their diamond industry interest to Botswana for nothing. And then they created Debswana that has actually made Botswana a country that can be self-sustaining, growing, economically good, has a massive health service, great architecture. I mean, it's amazing what the diamond industry and the mining industry did for South Africa, but it's time that changed. So I got into the diamond thing to grow this thing, to stop mining, to provide an alternative source that it might take 60 or 70 years to do, but it's the way to go. Good thing.
So I want to come back to your timeline, but I have two ancillary questions. First one is, I'm going to interview a gentleman called Dr. Simon Michaud on the podcast early next year, and he's a material flows specialist. So he sent me some YouTubes of him talking about material flows. And in one of them, he's with another gentleman who specializes in rare earth mining, and I was totally gutted by the videos of something simple like graphite, even not the rarest of earth, in China, and the acreage, the thousands of acres of polluted land and polluted water. And I'm wondering, are they now visible from space, or is the horror, it was truly the ultimate dystopian landscape that I saw in those videos, is the De Beers, or not necessarily the De Beers, but the mining industry worse than that? Or is it just that other mining industries have risen up in the last couple of decades since rare earths became so useful?
The whole problem with mining is sheer scale. And it is driven by the sheer scale of our consumerism. So, electric cars, for example, need batteries. Battery technology progressed a fair bit, but it's still a bit barbaric in many ways. It's still a bit basic. We're still extracting all sorts of materials to make batteries. As we offer everything, everything comes from some sort of extraction, whether it be water, whether it be lithium, whether it be gold, and it's all taken out as the individual material. It doesn't come ready-made. I'm mining batteries. No, I'm mining the materials for batteries. And if you've got 10 different materials, you've got 10 different mines, probably in 10 different places. And they've all got to be brought together. So there's the massive environmental impact, both of the mining and the sheer scale of it. I maintain one of my life's purposes is to help people understand scale. Understand, what it means, what a million means, what a billion means. I mean, I maintain that people in the UK didn't know what a million was until the lottery came along. They really hadn't heard it very much other than from government. They certainly hadn't heard about it as individuals and people, 30 odd years ago, whenever it was. In fact, I first understood a million when I was about 8, 9 years old. I was at the school, and one of our new classmates was a guy from Sheffield, whose family had moved down from Sheffield after his dad had a foundry accident, lost both his legs in a foundry accident, and he got one of the UK's largest payouts at the time, which was more than £1 million. Now, no one believed him in the class, this class of junior school kids, who all said, no, you can't, it wouldn't fit in your house. They didn't understand about banks. It didn't really, we didn't talk about money like that at home or anything else. So they said, it wouldn't fit in your house. And he said, no, it's not in the house, but yes, it's more than £1 million. But no one would believe him. So it was a great source of disturbance in the classroom. So my teacher, Mr. Burke, said, look, here's a £5 note. And he got a micrometer out and he showed us how to use a micrometer to measure its thickness and measure its length and measure its width and calculate its volume. And then, what's the volume of £1 million of £5 notes? £5 note, because, not many people carried around £10 notes, and certainly to carry around guineas or anything else. Anyway, we calculated it was about a metre cubed, a yard cubed, thereabouts.
Right. It would fit in the house.
So, yeah, but that gave us a first idea of what £1 million was like. And now you can put £1 million into a holdall with £50 notes. I mean, it's comparatively easy. And you can put it into your socks with €500 notes. That's that sort of thing. And that's why they had to get rid of them. So understanding the scale of things, when people say, we want 100,000 toothbrushes per day to be manufactured. Well, mobile phones, here's a better one. Mobile phones factories might knock out 100,000 to 1 million phones a day.
Gosh.
Just imagine how many that is every second. Or Coke bottles, or Coke cans, 20,000 per minute going round on a slow conveyor.
And then where do they all go?
And so, when you're mining 100 different elements for 100 different uses, or you're mining 1,000 barrels of oil a minute from somewhere, understanding what that means is really very important. So the mining industry generally is bad news for the planet, good news for us, and we can't just stop it. There's too much, and it's too interconnected. It's like I was saying, you got 10 components to a. That's 10 degrees of separation on your complex system, just for that one item.
So we're definitely still going to come back to your timeline, but we're now into accidental gods territory of we're in our multipolar crisis. Exactly as you're saying, everything is very big. Nobody is going to stop using computers tomorrow so that the assembly lines can stop. Do you have a personal vision, nothing to do with your employment by the government, of, first of all, how long do you think we've got before we hit material flow crises? That's Simon Michaud's thing, and I have to say things not very long for crucial material flows. And then before we hit a more critical planetary boundary crisis that slows down our consumption whether we like it or not. So that's the first thing. Do you have a sense of timescales? And then within the timescale that you inhabit, do you have a sense of any way that we could begin to shift away from the destructive habits that we've got into?
Wow. I think for me, part of the issue and my vision is actually to get people to understand that we're addicted to electricity. We burn more fossil fuel than we ever have before. We're using all our renewable energy sources not to offset our fossil fuel use, but to supplement it so that we can do stupid things like mine cryptocurrency. We use a huge amount of electricity. It doesn't democratize money. It doesn't do anything any good except for the 6 or 7 major shareholders in the world who are already exceptionally, obscenely wealthy to make more money. It's a giant Ponzi scheme. So, that addiction to electricity is getting worse. The more we call to burn less fossil fuels or to use less materials, extractive materials, the more we're doing it. So we're actually burning more fossil fuels than ever before. We're creating more electricity than ever before. And the way that we're creating most of our electricity, we might be producing as a world, 10, 15, 20% of renewables, renewable energy electricity. But the other lot is from burning wood pellets. How environmentally destructive is that? And just because it's biofuel or biomass doesn't make it any more environmentally friendly. In fact, it's less environmentally friendly in many respects. The major thing that has changed, we're not manufacturing very much more. In fact, there's been a manufacturing downturn globally because consumerism has gone down because of economic problems. But we're making more electricity to do more what? Computing. We're using the internet more. We're creating tons of data, and data is the new plastic, right? It is not the new oil. That's my mantra. It has been for the last 15 years, is that single-use data is worse than single-use plastic, because you can't recycle data. You can reuse it sometimes. Most of it isn't reused. Most of it's created. The Instagram pictures that I take, they're stored in 5 or 6 servers all around the world, whether I like it or not. It's never depleted. I create these digital things, and whereas we can turn analog signals, voltages, into digital effects, ones and zeros maybe, we can't take those ones and zeros and turn them back into voltage. We can't turn them back into electricity. It's a one-way street. It's a sort of diode-like behavior. So getting people to understand that no one can do everything, but everyone has to do something. And this crass argument that, it's down to the individual to reduce their carbon footprint. Well, yeah, it is in small part, but it's down to all of us to do that. And the whole carbon footprint anathema is a bit weird, but we all need to be educated. And my vision is that everyone understands that switching a light off when you leave the room or turning the heating down by 1 degree might not seem like very much. But when you've got 1 billion people doing that, you've suddenly got the enormity of use reduced by a bit. And if we can do that year on year for the next 10 years, we will reduce our overall consumption without even knowing it by a substantial amount. And that will help us achieve many of the goals, or move towards achieving many of the goals that we're trying to achieve. But asking people to say, just stop oil or just stop doing something is impossible. Everything is so interconnected. Our lives are interconnected, but our consumption is interconnected as well. We can't just stop doing stuff. So understand the scale of stuff, and then understanding that you don't have to reduce that whole scale yourself, but we all have to collect together.
Brilliant. This feels like we're into territory where I can have an opinion. I might know something about it. So first of all, we're working on a timescale of 10 years, perhaps, I think I heard you, but let's go back to that. There's a thing called Jevons paradox, which is basically that he pointed out that if you reduce the cost and of an item, whatever that item is, it doesn't, and make it easier to get hold of, it doesn't make people use it less. They just use more to fill the gap. I hear you on if everybody turns off the lights, turns the heating down by 1. But quite quickly, we reached the kind of bare minima that we did with water this summer. So we could stop taking showers, have sponge baths, probably too much personal information, but we can, down to a minimum. But there comes a point where our water consumption is what's needed to keep the animals alive and keep us alive, and there is no more left to cut. And yet, if somebody switched off the water, we would end up using less, even if we died. So it seems to me that either we're going to hit planetary boundaries and we're going to be forced to stop consuming, using oil, whatever else, or we have to find ways that don't take us down the Jevons paradox route, but take us to something else that isn't based on massive material consumption and everybody wanting to chase profits. And you seem to be right at the leading edge of this question. And I ask everybody what their vision is, and everybody gets a bit lost because it's really hard. We do live in a planet where it's easier to imagine the total extinction of humanity than it is to imagine an end to predatory capitalism. But I wonder, have you got an image of what the world looks like if we manage to reduce everything to a point where we're not destroying the biosphere?
Yes, I do. Yeah, as a kid, I heard Carl Sagan speak, and he said, we're just a spaceship traveling through the universe. We're a closed system. So all the time we're using something, it's not disappearing. It's changing its form. And my vision for how we might slow that degradation of the planet down and ourselves down is like I say, we don't have to remove everything 100% because we're not doing that. We're just shifting where it is. I mean, the amount of water there is on the planet is the same as this week as it was last week, plus or minus a bit. It's a closed system. And we have a variety of technologies, and not saying that technology is a solution by any means, but actually if we reframe our imagination to think, okay, so I've got these lithium batteries, rather than mining it, I'm going to repurpose it, or I'm going to recycle it, or we've focused far too much on extracting, converting, using and discarding. So I was brought up in that generation where my dad would repair the twin tub washing machine 15, 20 times over its 20-odd year existence. We would have bought it second hand, and he would have repaired it and patched it up until it can no longer be repaired. It is absolutely impossible other than replacing components which were going to be cost ineffective, and actually you just have to repair it again. So he would then say, right, we've got to buy a new washing machine. But this one's done its time. You amortize its cost and the effort put into it over it, and it's pennies per day. But he would still keep that twin tub washing machine in the garage because those bits might come useful. Or I go down to the scrap merchant and we'd take various bits down and exchange that scrap metal for money so it could be reused and reprocessed. Just like our aluminium foil caps or milk bottles we used to collect for charity for school, or newspapers and cardboard and everything else. Really into that. Let's refurbish, let's replenish, let's have a maintenance schedule to maintain our technology, even if it is really bad. Then we move on to my generation, which, I can repair our washing machine, and I have done. I expect if it doesn't last 7 to 10 years, then, I complain bitterly, but I will repair it whenever it needs to be repaired and can do that. But I will go more quickly towards the rather than the refurbishment aspect, because I can. And because actually life can be a little bit too fraught when you've got 3 kids under the age of 11, and one of whom's a baby, and you have to wash nappies every day. And it really used to get me down. So I will then, after 7 to 10 years, amortize how much this value I've got out of this washing machine, and then I'll buy a new one. But I'll have the other one safely disposed of, and it's sent off to the Great Washing Machine graveyard in Wales. And there it will be stripped down, or it'll just be stored for years and years. Maybe it'll be stripped down, the metals will be reused, or waiting for a time when a technology can Now we're on the current generation where my phone screen is cracked. I need a new phone, or I need to get it refurbished, which is great. Or I want the latest of this. So after 6 months or a year, even though it's still working, it gets put in a drawer or maybe sent to somewhere else. So we've progressed all along this line, further and further away from the real activity that we want in order to be able to at least sustain, and hopefully better maintain the planet.
Okay, so time is flowing past. Thank you for that. It's tremendously encouraging. I'd like to shift towards the leading edge of where tech is taking us, because yes, it is taking us to people wanting the latest iPhone rather than the one that they bought 6 months ago. But with any luck, as we change people's views, that will change. But there seems to me that you are working in the edge of technologies that the rest of us don't know exist, that presumably are not just there to extract value from people on the planet, but at least some of which are explicitly designed to help us make a transition to a more regenerative future. And I wonder if you could introduce us to some of those and let us know how we can help them along.
Yeah, it's a fascinating sort of journey. So if we come back to the sort of ethics side, for nearly a decade, I worked in this area called synthetic biology, engineering biology. I say it's the engineering of biology to do useful things and make useful stuff to heal us, feed us, fuel us, and most imperatively, to sustain us, sustain life on Earth. And it is engineering or biology to do good stuff. It is to create more resilient organisms. It is to use bacteria to eat plastic, maybe, or convert plastic into energy, or all of these sorts of things that you read in, Ursula Le Guin books and Margaret Atwood books, and most people have a dystopian outlook on it. Actually, it can be really, really useful. Of course, that's fraught with ethical problems, but it is one of those technologies that really can help maintain a lot of the ecosystems that we've got and actually be generative for them, and to use some of the things we've developed, some of the technology around this biotechnology that we've developed, to create some of the goods that we use all the time that we at the moment get from extractive technologies, but really should be creating regenerative technologies. Let's put it that way. And so, my journey in the ethics world and the tech world has gone all the way through from sort of power generation, electricity generation, through to materials generation with the man-made diamond, through to biological materials generation with engineering biology. And one of the key features of engineering biology is the fact that we can model and simulate and hopefully predict how we're going to create new materials, drugs, for example, or recreate materials that exist in nature, but we don't want to scavenge from the planet. And there's all sorts of protection mechanisms put in around that scavenging now, but hey, it still happens. We still farm, we still grow potatoes. You'll see that one other area that I've been associated with has been lab-grown meat, like lab-grown diamonds, and various other lab-grown things. Lab-grown meat is potentially a really good part solution for the generation of greenhouse gases by agriculture, in particular livestock, poultry and aquaculture. If we can make these things more environmentally efficiently and friendly, then we're
looking now very explicitly at the ethics. And you said right at the start that you wanted to help startups to start with an ethical base. How do you reach agreement across the board between you and any hypothetical startup as to what is ethical? What are our parameters? Because everybody has a different framing of the world, and let's say the ethics of an indigenous tribe in the middle of the Amazon might very well be different to the ethics of the tech bros in California. How do you find commonality that is still useful?
Issue to face. It's all done through discussion, and everyone's ethics is different. But I think the universal approach to ethics must be, is this needed? Is this going to do good in the world, or is it going to do nothing? Is it going to use more resources than it should do? Is it going to cause harm? Is it going to impinge on someone else's human rights in some way, shape, or form? Because the Bill of Human Rights is generally accepted around the world. There are some aberrations, shall we say, and there's certainly a lot of people who stretch it a lot further than it should be. But in general, when you're talking about 7 odd billion people on the planet, I think nearly everyone would agree the Bill of Human Rights is mostly right for them. And so all our ethical thinking should really be based around our understanding of what human rights are, and what freedom of speech is, and how we have to acknowledge, I believe we have to acknowledge that if we're going to enable freedom of speech, there's freedom of speech for everyone, even if we don't like it. We might not like what they're saying, but we should love the fact that they can say it. Now that gets stretched to a point where if they're starting to say things or do things that stretch that human rights belief, then we all have to say that this is outside of our basic Venn diagram, which enclosed by the Bill of Human Rights, and what we generally accept is good for mankind and more than humankind as well. We mustn't ignore that. It's very, very important, because we anthropomorphize everything, but that takes away the rights of buildings to not be degraded by acid rain. Who knows? The rights of animals to have clean air as much as we have.
So how do you plan forward? Because it seems to me that second order impacts are really hard to predict. If we'd gone back 15 years and talked to the developers of Twitter and said to them, at some point in the future, a bloke who's got enough money to send his own private rocket to the moon is going to take it over and tweak the algorithms such that the free speech of a certain sector of the community will be amplified and the rest may end up finding themselves diminished. And nobody knows what that will do to the future of democracy. Or even if you were to say that Twitter will become one of the tools through which trust will be undermined to the extent that democracy is under threat, that would have been incredibly hard to predict when social media hadn't happened and we hadn't seen that it brings out the worst in everybody. How does anybody ever get anything moving off the launch pad without paralyzing themselves with what might go wrong?
Well, let's take the example of startups working in tech. Suppose we were talking to the startup that created Twitter all those years ago, and we wanted to think, what's this going to be? We have imagined already the name Twitter, and we put a whole narrative around it. It's wonderful. We're using our imaginations all the time. It's what we're imagining that is often at fault. That's my view, is perhaps it's often at fault. We're always imagining bad. Or we're imagining a false good. And we're creating, we need to do this because it's going to help all these people. We need cryptocurrency because people don't have access to cash money, and that's going to disappear soon. And everyone wants the ownership of their own data. A lot of these are false, entirely false imaginations put together into a narrative to help us to accept the fact that actually what we really want is something very different. So we've gone into the startup Twitter. So from the off, they've imagined that this system can occur. Then they've gone through the activities to create the code that enables them to do what they think they should be doing. And at every step of the game, what we should be doing is helping that company to what are the consequences of doing this? To me, to my company, to society, to other people's society and other languages. So I think, although it's not possible to predict, it is possible to imagine the outcomes. And by imagining those, you can imagine ways of not getting there or ways of getting there quicker, in the event of good things. And that's what really some sort of ethical introspection needs. It needs people to sit down and imagine. So I take people through, on the tech side, talking about things like algorithmic bias. I say, well, the algorithm itself isn't biased. The bias is actually on how it selects data, and the data might be biased as well. So you've got bias times bias when it comes down to that. But how do you detect that? So I say, well, imagine you are data, right? You're a piece of data. So you're a PDF image or a JPEG image of yourself. Imagine what happens to you as you go through that algorithm. So go through the journey of being the data and how it flows through that algorithm. And line by line, what's happening to me? And then you can see, I've been excluded. Why have I been excluded? What is it about this algorithm that selected a 1, not a 0? Sort of thing. This bit of code. What is it about the algorithm that has done this? And how can I understand that better so that I can inform the data supplier or the data set that it needs to be selected differently? Or I can inform the programmer how I can select differently. See what I mean? It's that sort of understanding. Rather than just writing code, it's what is the code actually doing? And what does the data actually mean? What does it actually contain?
But is it not possible to have algorithmic shifts such that you're not promoting the people who are going for outrage and the dopamine hits? I think Audrey Tang in Taiwan is doing stuff with a local to Taiwan social medium that enhances cooperation, and that you wouldn't have to necessarily be policing content, but you're policing the response to the content at an algorithmic level. Yes, no?
Yeah. I think it comes down to scale, but it also comes down to culture as well. I mean, when you take Taiwan and you take what Audrey Tang's doing, it's within a cultural mix where the bounds are known, the boundaries are known, and the detectability and discovery of the information is limited to that language and to those people in almost a closed environment. The problem for me arises is that the world isn't borderless. It'd be a much better place if it were, but as soon as you cross borders, you cross cultural boundaries, cultural norms, different taboos. What is talked about in one country is considered anti-Semitic in another. So do you include that entire country or most of the people in that country, especially if they've been misinformed? Do you then exclude them? This is the whole policing bit, is that you can't get an algorithm to police something that it hasn't been able to detect for a long period of time and learn from. Machine learning, remember, is human.
And yet we have algorithms that are very effectively and demonstrably creating division, creating polarization, throwing people into tribes to which they cleave more strongly than they did before. Is it really not possible to create algorithms that create more cohesion and cooperation?
I think probably it is possible, but maybe that shouldn't be the goal. Maybe the goal should be to define those algorithms that are detecting words in sentences and saying, no, in our glossary, this word, and this often happens, this word is something that's inflammatory to these people. Therefore, we need to look at this again and look to see how the structure of those words is actually doing something bad or is fairly innocuous. So there's a lot of learning involved in there. We've all heard about some of the instances where people have been excluded on the basis of saying something that is totally innocuous. It just happens that that same sentence has appeared in part of a larger paragraph somewhere else from someone who's produced something inflammatory or derisory or otherwise. So again, it comes down to the scale of this. You have to remember, a computer is typically operating on these platforms about 100 times, 1,000 times faster than the human brain. We've got 86 billion neurons in our brain operating and firing to produce 1,000 thoughts a second, maybe 1 thought a second for some people, who knows? Inordinate amount of data to search through. So this detectability is incredibly limited. And if all your algorithms are pointed towards detecting this massive information embedded as needles in needles of a haystack of needles, you start to come across a brick wall where you just can't find it quickly enough or enough of it and respond quickly enough.
Okay, so in my own iterative loops, which I suspect are quite slow, we have single-use data is as dangerous as single-use plastic. I still have an image of the Pacific jar of plastic, which is 4 times the size of Texas and can be many meters deep. And I think I'm struggling to imagine data being that dangerous, but it doesn't go away. It's held. The ACI has got several terabytes for every person on the planet. And yet, Twitter, Facebook, social media, I hadn't intended to take this podcast towards social media, but it is proving really interesting. It seems to me that there's you said a few words in a sentence and Twitter doesn't like it and now it's banned you for life and that's very sad. But on the other hand, you could have been the ex-president of the United States trying to incite revolution and got banned from life. And that's, frankly, quite happy with that. You don't get to call fire in a crowded theatre when there isn't a fire. But it seems, my understanding is that the algorithms, particularly in Facebook, Twitter, possibly TikTok, which I don't go near, so I don't really understand it, that cause posts to be liked and reliked, depending on the number of responses that they get, and that the most inflammatory posts tend to arise from a relatively small number of accounts who are very, very good at posting very inflammatory posts, to the extent that the political parties in the US discovered that if they didn't produce posts that were inflammatory and which fed into their own tribe's side of you need to crush the other side really badly or we're not getting our dopamine hits, then they didn't get any traction. So you have an algorithmic setup that promotes division regardless of the language and based on the number of responses that it gets, which seems to me to be driven by the venture capital nature of funding and the fact that you have to, as you said, 20% of us could leave, but they're still dragging in more people because they have to not just continue to make a profit, they have to make an increasing profit every year to keep the venture capitalists happy. Presumably at some point they reach saturation and then they can't grow anymore, but then they have to create more division or change Instagram so that it becomes more of an income stream. Are you seeing anywhere at the edge of tech that you're working at people trying to create social media that we could all shift to that isn't algorithmically set up to promote hate between various groups on a planet that needs us all to pull together to help solve the multi-systemic crisis?
There are people producing new platforms like Web3 for example, they have their. But then again, it's a question of scale, and we all have to do this together. I believe that we can all globally imagine a better future, not a worse future. And we can imagine ways of getting there. They're not going to be easy. They're not all going to work. Most of them probably won't work. Some of those ways are things like regenerative anything. We need to learn to stop innovating, in my view, and start maintaining the innovation we've got and getting rid of some of the rubbish stuff. You know, some of the things that are purely generative and pointless, getting rid of some of the data generation or making it more efficient, making our energy use far, far, far more efficient. Low energy use electronics for computing, for example, could save 30% of the world's electricity generation. 30%, that would be an instant hit on the need to burn fossil fuels. So we need to vote, and there are people working on those things. They're very specific. And all of them to a T say, well, look, on our own, we're not going to be able to do this to get to less than 1.5 degrees. We have too many borders, too many boundaries, and not enough collaboration on a global scale.
Yes. This is a whole new podcast. I can feel as we're already so far over time, John. I don't know what we're going to cut to fit this in, because I think the idea of a borderless world government is a really interesting one, but also how do you stop it being corrupted and whose value sets do you give it? That's a whole different set of questions.
It's a utopian dream. I've got a little project going on that I've had going on for a long time that I've hardly progressed with because it's not a 100% easy project, and it's called A History of the Future in 7 words. And the 7 words include things like borderless and regenerative.
Right.
And various other things around what we might consider imagining doing and how it might consider changing the world. But when you start to dig into it, it starts to become a very, very knotty problem.
We have to stop there. I can feel this is going on and on. We will definitely need to come back for part 2 sometime in the new year, because I'm booked up until then. And in the meantime, I hope all of your exciting, disruptive, leading edge tech companies actually do make breakthroughs that lead us into the flourishing future that has to be possible. Thank you so much for coming on to the Accidental Gods podcast.
You're welcome. It's been great fun.
And that's it for another week. Enormous thanks to John, and thanks to Caro for wrestling with sound and the fact that the entire system shut down on me towards the end and we had to finish it on Zoom. So if you think the sound was slightly different, that's why. But thanks to John for engaging, for being so aware on so many levels of all that's happening, and for holding out hope. We will be back next week with another conversation. And in the meantime, enormous thanks to Caro for all of the extraordinary sound production and for the music at the head and foot. Thanks to Faith for booking the holiday, designing the website, holding all of the conversations that keep us moving. Thanks to Anne Thomas for the transcripts. And thank you to you for continuing to listen. We really appreciate the fact that you are out there. And if you know of anybody else who wants to wrestle with the big technical problems of our time, then please do send them this link. And that's it for now. See you next week. Thank you, and goodbye.